the idea of this panel discussion is to have a much more discussive and interactive forum. We've got some real industry experts on the panel here. I'll quickly run through their names, but actually it might be good if they could just run through what they do, how they do it, and more importantly, where they do it. And what I'll try and do is put some sort of meaty questions to the panel, and hopefully they can give us some insights around where they think the market is going, how the digital economy has changed, what it means to be an omni-channel sort of brand and communicator within markets, and also what market entry strategy is right for what countries. So here, sat immediately to my right, we've got James Hardy, CEO of TradeWise, until you find a more appropriate brand name. Yes. But importantly, previously Strategy and Development Director for Alibaba Group. We've got Grace Wang sat on the end there, works for a company called Everthames Company. They work and take British brands into China. And then we've got Martin, who's from Google, who I'm sure has got some great stuff that everyone wants to listen to as well. So as we're talking about the digital economy and digital cross-border sales, one of the things that really sort of comes to mind actually is how you work and how you deliver a brand when you don't actually have any physical and tangible goods for people to see. James, maybe with your sort of Tmall Alibaba background, maybe sort of give us a bit of an insight on what is an appropriate go-to-market strategy for a brand that can't necessarily kind of prove itself in the physical sense, and how do customers really then engage with a brand that they can't, in the sort of old analogy, see and feel and touch?
Yeah. Can you hear this? Yes? Okay. I think the first piece of it is to understand, and specifically, I'm going to stick more to China than anywhere else because that's the market that I know about, having worked at Alibaba. But fundamentally, nowadays, if you're going to build a brand, you're going to have to work in certain areas, particularly in the area of social media. That would largely be a global proposition. Very specifically, it would be a Chinese proposition because peer-to-peer is so important within the Chinese environment, specifically the concept of Guangxi within China, which essentially says that if I trust somebody, then especially if they're related to me or I know them through business, then they will be, their recommendations, let's say for a dentist, will be more relevant than any reviews I see anywhere else. If I come to trust a blogger, what they recommend to me will be more relevant than anything else in terms of this is a brand that you can trust, this is a brand that you should like. So social media, specifically in the China environment, is incredibly important, as also is developing content. And again, specific to the Chinese marketplace, even if you're on certain platforms like Tmall, or you may be on JD.com or Dangdang or any of the other platforms, you would want to have your own microsite where you have an incredible amount of detail. Chinese consumers are fascinated by real detail about the product. They want to know about the heritage. So you want to put a lot of information about the heritage in there as well. And so I think that as a sort of starting strategy around brand, you would want to focus on those two areas, particularly your own microsite and on social media. You can also do some work around search or anything else, but those two will give you the greatest bang for your buck. And you also want to talk about your British heritage specifically, the rise of, well, the Olympics, the royal baby, the royal wedding, even Downton Abbey. The biggest market in the world for Downton Abbey is now China. The biggest market in the world for Sherlock Holmes is now China. More people watch it. So brand Britain is fantastically valuable right now within that environment. So it will be market specific how you build a brand, but in most markets it will be social media, and then it will be social media plus something else. But certainly content, generating a lot of high quality content about your brand and about that space is going to be relevant as well.
Okay, so Grace, you work with British brands. You take British brands into China. So, with what James has said, what challenges do you face taking British brands? Because traditionally you've also worked with brands that you said are quite challenging in that you're trying to change consumer behaviour.
Yeah, that's right. Because when we first introduced Royal Warrant brands, it would be very difficult for Chinese consumers to understand why British are using this kind of style or products, because we normally don't use that in China. Say, for example, some men's shaving products. Nowadays, most of the generations, they use automatic. They don't use manual shaving tools. So when it comes to the products, we need to first tell them what the history of the products is, not only the brand's history, but also the product, why this product was invented even, and then telling them how to use this, when to use it, who would use this. So there will be loads of information and also search work behind each product and giving a very, very detailed usage behind each product spec. Even like when you take the photos, it cannot be just one product photo. It needs, like, say for example, for the men's shaving product manual one, we even take at least 100 photos for each angle of the blade. We need to explain why we use this blade against the other blades. So when consumers, when they look at the web page, they will think, all right, that's the value I pay for the products, because they can't see from the real shop, say from offline. All the details really needs to be reflected online. So that's one of the products we introduced to the Chinese market to change the behavior. And also we need to, well, that's the initial stage. We need to educate the consumers, and then once the consumers, they would accept the concept, how to use the product, then we could lead the consumer saying, right, that's how you dress up as a gentleman. That's how you use the product whenever you go to parties or whenever you go to some certain occasions. So there will be at least, I would say, at least 1 or 2 years as cushion time, as you may think, to educate the customers first what it is, the real product. Even if for a simple umbrella, we also need to tell why we use board cage, clear-cut view, dome shape. Because 1, 2, 3, you need to be seen from outside, and what material use, why we use the clear view. We don't give all sorts of different design because queen needs to be seen by outside. So there are a lot of information when we introduce brands. Each brand needs different story behind it, and also each product even needs to have different story behind it, like who invented, why invented, why is it necessary. So there are a lot of interest from the market for such needs. So it's pretty much like that. Even more detailed than the brand's history itself now. Yeah.
Martin, how much of that then rings true with, if I can say it, a company that doesn't sell anything but ultimately is one of the most successful that exists? How do you go about brand building? Grace has got a sort of 2-year brand building life cycle for new products in China. How do you go about doing that with and via Google?
So maybe before I kind of delve into that a little bit, I think first of all, reiterating that going digital first and potentially digital only allows you to be in a mode of going light touch, light resource, low risk, and therefore actually a lot more as possible than if you were to go bricks and mortar and if you had to think about much bigger investments. So I think that shapes your strategy in a very different way, where you can tip your toe in the water in a certain market. And I'm not as familiar with China as these two guys, so I'm speaking more broadly. But the investment and the thresholds are much lower, so you can afford to run a greater risk in terms of how you innovate around that strategy than if you were to build physical assets. I think the second thing, because we're operating in a digital world, we have access to insights and information and data that allows you to make much smarter decisions in real time. So when we're talking about consumer behavior, when we're talking about whether there is demand in certain markets for your products, there is free tools available all over the web. Google certainly have a few of them, like Google Trends or Consumer Barometer, where you can actually go in and search for the demand for your product all over the world, and even within specific regions within countries, to really narrow down again that risk and say, okay, that's specifically where my product is in demand, and even go as far as saying, well, what type of language, what words resonate with the local consumer and the local audience. So that more on a broader picture before you go into specific strategies. I think there is a mistake made, I always feel, when people are starting to build a brand internationally, is that the expectation of you going into a new market is that that is going to be as profitable as your home territory, and often expecting ROI from day one. And the reality is that's not going to happen. You look at big retailers all over the UK, when they open up a new store, that store is not going to be as profitable as their big flagship store that has been running for 50, 60 years. That's just not going to happen, and there is a period of where you have to allow for embedding in. Not least because nobody is going to know your company, nobody is going to know your brand. So the ROI expectations often are mismanaged from the word go, and therefore building a brand becomes very difficult, because the immediate ROI on brand building is very difficult, very different to if you're at the bottom of the funnel just transacting with people that are already engaged with your brand and ready to buy your product. So managing that expectation and having an allowance for a different ROI metric, I think, is really important. I would echo what was said before in terms of social channels, but certainly also thinking about PR. And if I've worked for years with companies like ASOS or Net-a-Porter, etc. I think in the very early phase when they do go international is finding local advocates for your brands and people that can actually spread the message to a relevant target audience. So really thinking about who are the key influencers in country that you can strike up a partnership with that can actually really sing your praises is an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to early phase. And then, of course, building that out with some of the points that were already mentioned earlier around creating relevant content, unique, relevant content that is tailored to the local consumer. But certainly also being aware of what channels there are in the individual market. You know, Google is a global proposition, and we have platforms all over the world, but there are local platforms that are equally as important. China not least, but there are other markets, right?
Yeah, we somehow we do have kind of what everyone probably knows, the censorship in China. So Google is I think is more robust than the local any search engine platform. However, it would be very difficult. For example, if I'm in China, I can't even log on Google. Even google.com.hong Kong, I cannot even log on. So all the information only be available through Baidu.com, the local search engine platform. So in this case, if any of you would consider go to Chinese market to think about any search engine thing, I would think probably you need to utilize Google with the local search engine platform together to maximize your market presence. I think that's the only suggestion I could make.
I think that leads quite nicely into sort of a global versus local conversation as well. And Martin, you brought up a really good example. So just behind you is also ASOS, and you mentioned ASOS. So ASOS also a company that UKTI is working with. So they 85%, and you might know the stats a bit more than we do, 80-odd% of their traffic is driven through their .com site. They've got a skin on Tmall, and then they've also got their own .cn site in China as well. And obviously Tmall for them is almost certainly a media buy, so they're looking at opening up all of the 360-odd million people that are on Tmall. They've got their own dedicated sort of on-brand messages that they're pushing through their .cn site, but still vast majority of their traffic and sales are coming through their .com site. So how important is it to have localized sites versus just a sense of localization on someone else's site, and how does that tie in with maybe a global brand positioning?
Let's maybe, if we ask the audience very quickly, how many, everybody's familiar with ASOS, correct? As a retailer. Who thinks that ASOS have more than 10 local sites, translated sites? Few. So the rest of you think they have less. So my game didn't quite work. But if you think about ASOS as probably about £1 billion turnover company this year, 75%, 70 to 80% of that will come from outside of the UK. They're probably the biggest fashion retailer in markets like Australia, full stop.
Yeah, second biggest market, yeah.
So they only have, if my latest stats are correct, I think they have 8 local translated sites. So if you think about that, they fulfill to 237 international markets. They only have 8 of those translated. My point being, don't go local and invest loads of money and translate until you reach certain critical mass. I think ASOS, of course, once you get 10% of your business from Germany, France, etc., you go heavy and you start translating, manually translating and getting that right. But for the other markets, service them either through one of your translated properties or serve them through a global English site. Allow for currency, of course, to be displayed in local currencies, but don't go and spend loads and loads of money on translation or localization, full-blown localization. And even once you have localized to a certain extent, it doesn't have to be the full mile. ASOS did not put in all the German payment solutions from day one on their German site. Most people that you will speak to when they talk about localizing for the German market will tell you there is no business to be done unless if you localize for German payment solutions, because there's a very dominant payment solution in Germany. ASOS didn't put that in until I think a year and a half, 2 years after they launched a German site. So my point being, light touch localization, and only when you start reaching a certain critical mass. So
if it's a question of scalability, James, does that mean marketplaces then have just sort of future-proofed themselves? Because if you have the ability to reach out to hundreds of millions of customers, like your former employer, they've almost sort of created a market-leading position for themselves that isn't going to change.
Well, it varies by market, because I think you're seeing some markets fragmenting. And realistically, the Chinese market is fragmenting. Whether the dominant players will lose much share is still not sure, but my guess is that they probably will lose some market share. And you're already seeing an incredible rise in the number of platforms in China. And what happens really is that marketplaces tend to fragment. They certainly fragment geographically, but really they fragment down different verticals, because you can't get a network effect as a marketplace. You can't get a network effect if somebody tries to build the new eBay or the new Amazon right now. To do so is almost impossible in any marketplace, because there's already an existing equivalent of eBay and Amazon, or in most markets. Within China, that's Tmall for the Amazon B2C place. But on the other hand, you can get somebody like Etsy who comes along, who can disrupt those markets. So I think you'll see over time, most marketplaces will see an increasing fragmentation. The marketplaces where Amazon is really dominant, it will be harder and it will take longer. But Amazon is still losing market share to, Etsy in certain markets. They're still fragmenting. Same with Tajuri, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure they have future-proofed themselves. I think if you have a niche brand, they're increasingly on niche verticals. Certainly within China, there are a huge number of niche platforms, and you can find a platform that will fit your brand. And that will fit your, depending on the vertical that you're in. And that's a much better play generally, because people are going to that platform, even if it's only 5 million people versus, somewhere between 300 and 500 million to Tmall, depending on what you read. Even if it's only 5 million, they're going there to buy products like yours. So really it's about researching the right platform within those markets. Going back to your question, I'm not sure they have future-proofed themselves. Okay. I see a world of massive fragmentation within the marketplaces.
And I think I'm right in saying that Billionaire 2, Billionaire 3, and Billionaire 4 have just teamed up in China to take on Jack Ma, I think.
Yes. So there's a lot of competition against. Yeah. And I mean, JD.com is growing very fast. The second largest platform in China is growing very fast. Their mobile solution is better than any other platform's mobile solution. Already there is going to be a fragmentation over time.
And so it's about vertical disruption as opposed to horizontal.
I think when you look at what's happening in marketplaces right now, it's generally a vertical disruption. Yeah, right. And if you're going to start a marketplace, certainly starting it down the vertical line is better, because you can get a network where you can get producers matching or suppliers of product matching consumers. And of course, it's much cheaper and easier to market to target verticals. So when you've got a limited budget, as you do when you're starting a new marketplace, you can target limited small verticals much more easily. And that is leading to fragmentation. And the Chinese market certainly is becoming more fragmented. The US market is definitely becoming more fragmented, notwithstanding what's going on with Amazon. And the UK market's becoming more fragmented as well. Yeah. So.
And you alluded to something earlier on about social commerce as well and how important the social media play in China is. Grace, how important is that to the brands that you're taking out there? Because obviously a lot of what you're doing is brand, education in market of those brands. How do you go about sort of creating a new social commerce strategy for a brand that hasn't existed before?
What we normally do is we normally go back to the brands, asking them if they could produce some videos of the manufacturing process, because that would give the clear view how this is made, because we don't normally do any makeup stories telling them this is made. Actually, it doesn't exist. And we also tell them as by year book what this product was, and when it was established, the company, and who invented the products, and until now, what season it is yearly. And in terms of e-commerce, we at the moment, as all the guys talked about, we normally will work with Tmall and JD.com. For the Amazon, I just mentioned one thing. We hardly use Amazon because Amazon always purchase or procure their own products, or they distribute their own products through their own supply chain. Say they have products made in China, and they procure themselves locally, and they distribute through their different depot across the country. So it will be very difficult for very high-end brands to go to China via Amazon.com, because literally it doesn't really work. So with Tmall and JD.com, they have their own special channel called Luxury Goods Channel. With this channel, you could put in very good history products, or with very high heritage products through this channel, because all the same or similar products are there. You could match, say, Royal Warrant brand umbrellas, match with Royal brand tie or shirt, shoes. So they all match together on one platform. So when customers come to this section, and they would look into particular product range, and these customers, they have high, I would say, a high income in the society. They know what they are looking for. And for the JD.com, I must say, they develop very fast. They acquired a lot of local social media companies. So they are very good at mobile technologies. And now if you are going to China, you could see loads of young generations, they use very big mobile phones, or they don't use laptop or any of, say, iPad now. They only use very big Samsung or iPhone to browse. So now what we are doing for all the Royal British brands at the moment, we have the mobile site through the Tmall and the JD.com, specialized for all this audience, because when they are going to work, or when they are off work, they just would like to browse what is available online. I would like to buy immediately, so that you could get a lot of traffic, a lot of interest, and quickly all this information and the news would spread out immediately, because we have a local social media called Weixin. That is like a personal message platform, and when someone likes that deal, and he or she would share by just a click button through the platform, and then all their friends would know, and then they would buy immediately. So that is mobile technology JD has. I think now JD in this term has a bit more advantage technology than Tmall. Tmall is, for me, is like a department stores. JD for me is like a leading department store. I think that there is a difference between something that could lead the market, somebody just organize all the brands together.
Can I add to that as
yeah,
well?
Yeah.
JD's also, as well as building a better mobile solution, they've also got a fantastic delivery network, which leads to this phenomenon which benefits sellers of the mobile fitting room, because they will wait while you try it on, because they've got their own logistics network. And one of the things that they will do is they will wait while you try on whatever it is that you're trying on, or whether it's a diamond necklace or a dress or whatever it may be. And that, of course, massively reduces returns. And so JD.com is building certain advantages in the market for retailers, which are, or for brands. Is there anything else? Anything I've missed? I think that's it. It's mobile.
And also, I think the beauty of JD.com, previously I don't really like JD. I like Tmall because Tmall is very big, and also the founder, they say very smart. Yes, he is smart because he is a leader of the whole e-commerce industry in China. However, JD, I think, is the logistic. They have very good distribution centers across nations, and with very low delivery charge. Is say, for example, one parcel from one province to another province only charge even less than £1. So that actually could give the pricing or the market advantage against any of the platform. And also JD's headquarters is in Beijing, as probably everyone knows, Beijing is the capital of China. So loads of rich people are there. And then JD is doing same-day delivery. So, for example, if in the morning it's raining, and then if I click a button, and then in the afternoon before I'm off work, and then I would have my umbrella delivered. So to do very good delivery. But for the Tmall, they don't, I think at the moment they don't have their own distribution network, but JD has. That's puts the threat against Amazon, because Amazon in China, they don't have their own distribution team. They only have distribution center, so they still subcontract to the local, say, delivery companies. So that puts away the customers when they want to buy the same day, and then you can't get the same day for some certain products. Like if you are selling like very fresh produce, you want crab in the afternoon for your dinner, and then you can't get it. You may only get next day. But with JD, you could get it in the evening. So JD, I think in this case, they actually spot the difference against the Tmall, because Tmall is so big, so they can't cover all the areas. So they can only focus on one area they are good at. But JD is good at different things, so that puts them to the lead in this logistic things. Okay. So
conscious we're a bit China-centric at the moment. So how does the lessons of a sort of mobile-centric consumer work with Google's sort of take on new markets, but also how to sort of reach out to new customers as well?
So I don't know who was here this morning for the initial presentation this morning, but that very much resonated with me. There was basically a talk about the future is mobile, the consumer is connected through the internet, through mobile devices, and there were a few stats around more mobile devices being connected every single day than children born. That's just the age that we live in. I think we're coming up to Christmas here in the UK. If I look at retail-related search queries in google.co.uk, comes Christmas, over 50% of those search queries will come from a smartphone. Not a smartphone and a tablet together, no, just smartphones. So it is going to be the primary device, even in the UK, for people to connect to the internet to. Now, the UK in that sense is slightly ahead of the rest of Europe, slightly behind the US, but once you go into certain markets in Asia, it majorly over-indexes on mobile again, and actually without a mobile proposition you won't have a proposition, to the extent that actually mobile might be the only proposition you have in certain markets once you start thinking about exporting. Now you go to South Korea, you go to Japan, in those markets it might not even make sense for you to have a desktop site. So that's kind of how extreme it is. If there was one message less related to export but more to retailing and successful e-commerce retailing in the UK, there's still approximately 40% of top UK retailers that don't have a mobile proposition. Don't have a site, don't have an app, have simply not thought about what their mobile strategy looks like. And I expect those those retailers to have a very, very bad Christmas this year, because without a mobile proposition, you're not going to excel in e-commerce. And it's staggering the amount of boards that I will go into and talk to in the UK of top 100 retailers in the UK that do not have a mobile strategy. And if you ask them, how many people do you have developing for your mobile web versus your desktop web, or what percentage of your marketing dollars goes against mobile advertising, it is actually quite painful to ask those questions, and often there is no answer given.
I speak from personal experience. So the platform that I worked on in the Middle East, about 6 months after we launched, we had started talking about getting around to then launching either a dedicated mobile site or a mobile-enabled site. And it was only then that we started looking at our mobile stats, and over 50% of traffic coming into the site was from mobile and tablet. We looked at them together. But then our bounce rate was so high that it's sort of mind-blowing, really, that we didn't really know that we had these types of customer, or potential customer, because they weren't buying anything.
Yeah, well, it's a very different customer, and that's why it's often deemed to be a not so valuable customer, because the engagement through a mobile device is somebody walking down your high street, looking for your local shop, comparing prices. Is that customer as likely to purchase there and then as somebody that is sitting at home on a big screen? No, but it's a critical part of the customer journey, and if you don't cover it, you don't offer an excellent experience there, that customer is gone and will shop elsewhere.
So is it fair to say that then that's potentially the biggest missed opportunity?
For me, no doubt. Yeah. In the build up to Christmas, or in the medium term, getting a mobile strategy right, absolutely.
And with your sort of social commerce orientated platforms that you work with, I guess it's the same. Yeah?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you've got a choice, I completely agree. If you've got a choice as to whether to do desktop or mobile, go straight to mobile. Don't, especially in any non-UK market, but even in UK markets, go straight to mobile. And a lot of it's to do with touch points. And in certain markets, you have to do it because the demographic is, I mean, Turkey is more than 50% of people are under 30 years old. You would only do mobile in Turkey. You wouldn't bother with desktop because that entire demographic will only be using mobile, really. I mean, Turkey's very, very immature in terms of e-commerce, but as they mature, it will be a mobile-first market. It will not be a desktop-first market.
Interesting dynamic, again, from the Middle East. It was the key mobile users were the sort of under 18s, so the early adopters of that type of device. And yet, iPhones weren't launched, I think, until 2011. They were sort of blocked, and Facebook was only unblocked in 2010. And then the numbers just went off the chart. So, Martin, you might be able to sort of cement this. But am I right in thinking that the YouTube videos watched per head or per capita is the highest in the world? Where? I might know more stats than you.
I think you might know this one. Yeah.
So Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So a site that was only unblocked in Saudi Arabia sort of 18 months ago now has the highest videos watched per capita in the world. And they're all under the age of 25. So it just sort of goes to show actually that in hindsight we got it wrong with our site and had to go to some length to try and fix it.
I would also go back to your, actually the slight transition maybe, but going back to the China centricity of the conversation we've had so far. Google's story in China is obviously challenging, but if we look at where do we see the biggest success for UK exporters, it is primarily the first few markets are the big English-speaking markets. We're unbelievably privileged that we're in an English-speaking country and we have a scalable proposition that doesn't really need that much localization, and that will probably get you to the next 4 big opportunities. Ireland, switch Ireland on, that's another 10%, and then you start thinking about some of the markets, whether it is Middle East or actually Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, you can pick up huge volumes just with an English-speaking proposition. And when we go further down the list and just look at the top 15 markets that we help UK retailers export into, out of those 15, the English-speaking make up a big chunk, then it's Western Europe making up the next big tranche. And then there's really only 2 markets outside of that we see pop up at significant scale right now, right here, and that's Russia and Brazil. Not saying that those are the right markets after Europe and English speaking to go into, but I want to avoid people being scared of exporting because the first thought is, oh, we have to go and do it in China, or we have to go and do it in South Korea, or we have to do it in Russia, where exporting is actually quite a tough gig as from a starting perspective. I think there are easier, quicker wins to be had.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that point. I think you would want to be very wary about going into the Russian market because there are huge customs challenges within the Russian market, and even the fast delivery providers, even the best logistics providers, are having huge problems ignoring everything that's going on in the Ukraine. Even if that simmers down, for the last 2 or 3 years, they've had massive problems getting anything into Russia. And it's the same with Brazil, where customs will open a tremendous percentage of everything that goes in. Then the end user is taxed on it, and the whole process is proving to be very difficult. Another market where there's a huge challenge from an export point of view is India, which in theory should be a fabulous market. One day it will be, but right now it's not. It's very difficult to actually get your product to the end user within India. The default for Britain, historically, people have always been told, go to Western Europe. Going to Western Europe is quite difficult because the EU is heavily regulated. You have to put language shifts all over stuff. You've got IP issues, etc., etc. I would never discount the English-speaking markets for exactly the same reason that the English-speaking markets will deliver you scale so much more easily than almost any of the Western European markets, many of which are very, very painful to be doing e-commerce in, to be doing returns in, to be doing customer service in, or anything else.
So if that's a quick lesson in where to go and how to do it, have you got any examples of how not to do it?
I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, you look at, going back to the first point I made, is we have an opportunity to go at it digital, low risk, and go fast. I think those companies that have failed big time have been the ones that bought up big estates, brick and mortar. You look at Tesco's in the US, or you look at Best Buy coming into the UK. Huge investments before they really understood the market and really tested the waters in those markets. So I think it's that light touch model. Use the data to figure out where the demand is, put your product into that market without putting huge amounts of marketing digital investments behind it, and just see what your current proposition could do in those markets. We have a few retailers that use, for example, Google Translate, which many of you have probably used on holiday to translate the menu. Using that for business purposes now as well. And that's just a simple free plugin that you can put onto your site that will translate your website into 82 different languages once the consumer uses a drop-down box. And it's not perfect, and it's by no means as good as a manual translation, but it offers your site to 82 different languages, probably with a couple of hours of developers' time. And it then allows you to quickly gather insights and build on that. And to be honest, for me, one of the most powerful things of being on a marketplace is gathering insights. So you can then, as a second phase, go away and do it yourself in parallel to being on a marketplace. Might not be true for all markets, because I think China might be an exception to that, where actually it's not, it probably isn't an exception to that. But if you think about the insights you can get very, very quickly from being on a platform, on a marketplace like ASOS, if you're a fashion retailer, and the insights you can get into which markets resonate to the product that you're selling, for the product that you're selling, is quite powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think also what's really changed, and where the great opportunity is right now, is that more and more of these e-commerce marketplaces, you can send product in from abroad. And that means that you maintain all your own working capital, you retain all your inventory and everything else. You're not having to leave large quantities of inventory in the countries. That certainly applies. Oh, very, very low risk, because fundamentally you just can open a store on that e-commerce platform. You solve the money piece of it, and that's usually actually one of the simplest pieces of it. The currency piece is usually a plugin on the site. All you need to do is work out a decent logistics solution from where you are to any consumer, any local consumer within that. But most of the 400 or so platforms that have opened up now are offering that the consumer, as long as it's tracked, that the consumer can just receive the product direct from outside the country. So that means you've got no inventory tied up, you've got no working capital tied up, you've got no risk of having 1,000 boxes of something stuck somewhere where they can't sell. And as long as you integrate all your inventory, so you're able to track how much is going to which country or whatever it may be, it just is another market for you, in the same way that Surrey is another market, or in the same way that you've been on eBay in the UK and you're going on to Amazon in the UK, it just becomes another market. Now, it's not always that easy because of returns, but fundamentally it is a much, much safer way to trade. And you know, it allows you to test the opportunity.
That sounds like a pretty good note to end on, I think.